I'm coming from Nova Scotia, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Our focus this month is nourishing ourselves, not just physically, but also emotionally, spiritually. One of the reasons I thought it would be good to do this is because December is often a time when people feel very stressed. And also when we feel very much like there's something wrong with us if we don't fit into that kind of Hallmark Channel view of what a family should be. Many of us with trauma are estranged from families in some ways or feel uncomfortable. So when we get this feeling of exhaustion, one of the things that it seems to just kind of make it worse is that then we don't often do the things we know that will really help. So if we feel when we go to bed, we have, hours of restlessness or thoughts are just going crazy with some kind of anxiety or worry, then we wake up not rested. So some of these basics around sleep and good food and doing a relaxation practice instead of or maybe before zoning out with Netflix or something, those things don't come naturally to us when we're stressed. And a lot of people shame themselves for that. So one of the things that we can always do is keep working on this compassionate, kind relationship we have with ourselves. And in my experience, when I get rested, then everything gets better. So whether that's that I'm getting more sleep, I'm eating better, or that I'm not working as much, that I have some unstructured downtime. And ironically, we get more productive as we rest rather than the other way. So in the culture that we're in, and I wanted to take a few minutes for this slide just to think about these messages. There's so many messages around don't be lazy, don't be just sitting around doing nothing. We have this human doing, not human being. And even when we think about when we get a hold of or we connect with someone, oftentimes when we ask how someone's doing, we'll say, oh, I'm so busy. So there's this feeling of it's not ideal to be that busy. But there's also sometimes a feeling of, oh, I'm so busy. And it's in our culture, it's often really approved of that we're overextended, we're too busy. Lots of times people will talk about COVID as being this period of lockdowns and social isolation has been a relief in some ways for many people, not for everyone, but has been a relief because we actually could stop doing as much as we were doing. And we had a good reason for that. So let's take some time now. What were the messages you received about time and money? And very much related to that, your conditioning about your worth and how your worth is connected with your productivity. And notice how certain memories, certain people might come in with a certain feeling in your body. You might tighten up, your breath might change. And if anything's getting too intense, you could always do some tapping on your forehead or do some breathing. Use the tools we have to stay present. And it might come in as a stream of memories and messages, or all kinds of different options for how this could come in. So just to stay present with it. And notice as well what your experience is with going against your conditioning. Might be some personal version of the scorn that was leveled on the hippies, the counterculture during the 60s from their parents, who were very, generally speaking, very much hooked into keeping up with the Joneses. So if you are different, or if you have a different focus, notice how that might have affected you, if you were shamed for that or praised for that. And also to bring in how this impacted your sense of your inherent or intrinsic value. So if your praise or inclusion was very much linked to your productivity, did that foster some core deficiency beliefs, some feelings of I'm not worth anything unless I'm successful with money or something like that? Notice your body, always keeping our body in mind. Notice the breath. And then let's move to the next slide. So we have a story in our culture that we're rewarded for hard work. And this is part of how the deficiency beliefs come. So the truth is that we're not rewarded equally for hard work. And we've really seen this during COVID as well. Many of the people who work the hardest are actually making minimum wage. And minimum wage is not sufficient to have a standard of living that's reasonable. Minimum wage is often a poverty wage, and people are working two jobs or living in crowded conditions. Anybody who's been in a workplace setting knows this to be the truth. So we have all these social variables, people who are attractive, even in children in grade school. They've done studies that the teachers assess children who are attractive as smarter, even though it doesn't correlate to their IQ. Being well liked and approved of, and how much we fit the dominant culture in our workplaces or other places. If you're different skin color, if you're a woman in a male dominated profession, if you don't really fawn and suck up to people, if instead you're one of those people that kind of sits at their desk and works, it's not fair how these things happen. So just to acknowledge for a moment and feel that in your body, that there's a work culture, a success culture that we have, and that we're shamed if we don't win in the culture. and that we feel like we're somehow less than if we have a blue collar job and not a white collar job. If we have parents who are proud of us going to university but not proud of the one that became a plumber. There's a lot of ways that this subtle and sometimes really obvious judgment works. So we're not actually rewarded equally for hard work. That's not true. It's just a story. So Brene Brown, who of course is just actually her new book, Atlas of the Heart, looks really interesting too. I just got it the other day. But we have this authenticity, and Gabor Mate talks about we trade authenticity for attachment. So she, in this quote, is authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are. And so this relates very much to this pushing ourselves. So as we're doing these practices and as we're doing this deep healing work, many people see is the pushing that happens all the time. And it could be the inner critic. It could be that voice that we've internalized, maybe from a parent, a teacher, that we have to push and work hard to get ahead. It can be a safety issue. If we're the perfect daughter, we'll be approved of. If we're the perfect student, we will be encouraged. If we're the perfect football player, whatever it is, if we're the perfect something or other, we will be included and we won't be shamed or bullied. So that's setting up this really hard dynamic to be working with. We feel this dread of if I don't get the floors perfectly clean, if I don't get those extra marks, if I say no to something that's not good for me, I'm going to be in trouble. So one of the ways that we notice that is not whether or not we clean the house, but what is the environment around that? Are we feeling anxious or driven? Another way is how much do we go over? How compulsive are we about making a mistake? So if you're double and triple checking your work all the time, to stop and sometimes that's appropriate. We need to double check some things to make sure that they're accurate. But what's the energy behind it? So just to sit for a moment here again, what's your experience with this about having to do things perfectly as a survival strategy? And many people have direct experiences, punished if things weren't perfect. And an unreliability of that as well. Sometimes things are okay, sometimes they're not, but it doesn't seem to make sense. And take a few breaths. Let your body relax, your shoulders, your mouth and jaw, your breath. What is your experience with this? And then let's look at some of the other ways that we could be valued. So, in many families and in our culture, there's a lot of value put on financial success. And there are some people and some families who have values around being good neighbors or friends. Do you admire that person who always gets involved or who sometimes gets involved in social justice? This Save the Owl's Head Provincial Park is something that happened in Nova Scotia. It's still ongoing, but we had a big win a few weeks ago. And a lot of that was because of the people who volunteered to make the signs and go to the farmers market and get petitions signed and banding together. And so is that something that you would be approved of for? Or is that something people would be like, yeah, I don't think that's such a good idea, or just it wouldn't occur to them to see that that's a value that you bring to our communities. And maybe you're that good friend. Maybe you have a well regulated nervous system and you can be kind of counted on to be the one who's present and aware and calm. And that doesn't happen by mistake. We all know that. Or maybe you're always the one who brings your guitar to the get-togethers and leads the singing or something like that, or an artist. So look to your own experience. In what ways could you maybe give yourself some credit that maybe you don't even think about most of the time? Notice how that feels in your body. Or maybe you're thinking of somebody else. In my family, on my mom's side, it was very much if you made a lot of money, you were approved of. And certainly I was never approved of for this kind of thing. So notice that. Is that your experience as well? Or is there something else, some other kind of nuance going on there? And then we get to this point sometimes, and a lot of people are here. Our nervous systems are not meant and not well structured for the kind of stress we've been under over several years now, and in particular, the heightened stress with COVID. This picture is in near Cape Blomidon in Nova Scotia. And I remember stopping the first time I went by it, and I was just stunned that they just tie their boats up and then they let them rest on the sand when the tide is low. And then when the tide comes back, it lifts them up and they untie and they go off fishing. And it's such a striking picture of somehow sometimes we just get to that point where we feel so exhausted that we're depleted. And then what do we do? So you might have a recent memory that might be your situation right now. Or maybe you have memories of times when you felt like that. I can't go on. And there might be some people for whom their natural response then would be to shower themselves with love and kindness and compassion. That's not really what our culture teaches us. Mostly we push. Well, I just have to get through these things. I can't remember how many times I would say, well, I just need to get through the next 3 months, or I just need to get through this big project and then I won't work so much. So notice your experience and notice what are the memories that are coming up and how do you feel in your body? If you were to say to yourself or maybe to somebody else, I'm feeling really depleted. I'm going to rest more and do more nourishing things right now until I feel better. I'm not going to push through this one. And maybe I'm even going to be with myself in a very kind way. If this was somebody else, oftentimes we'll really see the dynamics that are at play, what it is that's being draining on our energy, what it is that we might need to nourish ourselves. And we likely aren't as condemning of other people as we are of ourselves. So we might open that up as a possibility. I could rest. Let's sit with that for a minute. Could I have compassion for other people who push themselves like this? They're not always the nicest people to be around. And sometimes it's that they're not really available for us the way they were before. because they're exhausted. And this is happening all the time right now. As we're well over the year and a half mark, we're heading towards 2 years with COVID. People are really tired. More people are in fight, flight, freeze than before. People are just coming kind of to the end of their energy supply. And that very likely, at least to some extent, is happening with ourselves as well. So, could we step back from the pushing around it and just feel compassion? And bring someone to mind, or put your hands on your heart, bring yourself to mind. And you offer that to yourself right now, just for a moment. Acknowledge how hard it is. And extend some compassion to yourself. You could let your body soften a bit, let your breath become a bit smoother. Let go of worry for a moment. So let's take another several minutes here to look at some of these inquiries. So the reverse inquiry is when we say something that is not exactly true, and we are able to elicit some of the things that are in the way. So, what would have to change for these statements to be more true in your life? As you say them, I'll just kind of scroll through them over the next couple of minutes. Or you could let yourself scan them and then take one or two that really feel like you'd like to inquire into that and reflect on that. It's okay to rest. I'm 100% comfortable with resting. I rest when I need to. So, no shame, no thinking there's something wrong with me if I need to rest. I should be able to push through. I rest when I need to. And as you're sitting with that, notice if something changes in your body or your breath. Notice what thoughts come in, if they're in a particular person's voice. It's okay for me to rest. And I manage my life to include rest and people and activities that bring me joy. And what would have to change for that to be more true? I include rest and people and activities that bring me joy. And sometimes that's the way we approach what we're already doing, to enjoy what there is to enjoy. Sometimes our circumstances are pretty constraining and we don't have a lot of extra time, but we usually have some time, some agency in this. What could I do to increase the rest and people and activities that bring me joy? Notice your body and your breath. And let yourself open to some possibilities there. And I am a person with inherent worth, independent of what I produce or contribute to others in the world. Just before we finish the inquiry and the reflection, to reflect with that. I don't have to produce anything to be inherently worthy. I don't have to earn my keep here in the sense of overworking or being financially successful. I'm it's nuanced. My worth rests on a lot of things, but it doesn't rest on my productivity. And we might have a huge sense of value and alignment in terms of how we move about in the world and what we do contribute. There's a meaningfulness around that and a validation our lives can be very rich with what we contribute and how we interact with others. So we're not saying that's wrong, just to look at what is my inherent worth that doesn't relate to that, to being productive. Letting ourselves feel into that for a moment.